hello.
Hello, Lorraine. How are you this morning? Or
I'm
this
good
evening, I should say to you.
this evening. Well, as I always like to say, we just say good day now because everyone's all over the world. So that's just the
That
easiest answer.
that is true. It's very Australian as well.
Is it? Okay, I didn't know that. Well, that makes me feel good about it.
Yeah. Good day. Lorraine, we are so happy to have you here. We are so happy to hear you talk about how we can make Sabbats our own with the Seasons of the Witch Oracle series. I will leave it to you to take it away.
Okie dokie. Just turn off my notifications. Okay. So, hi everyone. It is so nice to be joining you all, especially for Rockpool's very first summit. Summits are always a lot of fun and a lot of great ways to connect with people. So I'm so excited to be here and glad that you're joining me. Um, so we're going to talk about something that's kind of fun, that's in development, that I've been working on for a while. The Seasons of the Witch series, which for those of you who aren't familiar is a series of 8 oracle decks, has based on the Wheel of the Year, has been in the works now for a very long time. And every time I work on a new deck, I learn so much about myself. I learn so much about the Sabbats themselves. But most importantly, I learn a lot about my spiritual practice, my personal practice. Um, and I never write a deck in a way that like when it gets to the end, it's never what I imagined it to be at the beginning, right? Like there's so many layers and nuances and so many different ways that you can kind of reinvent the Sabbats and find yourself in them. But when you've been working with them for as long as I have, which is a really long time, things can feel a bit stale after a while. There's only so many times you can set an intention for balance for Maven or Ostara before you realize 10 years have gone by and you start saying, well, I've been setting this intention for a long time and still haven't found balance yet. Like, what's going on? Or the opposite is true and you feel like you've mastered Maven, you feel like you've mastered Ostara, you feel like you've gotten everything that you could get out of it. Maybe you feel balanced, maybe you feel grounded. You're like, I've done all the shadow work I can possibly do. And now you're wondering what comes next. Even if you're a beginner, I think there are certain challenges with working with the Wheel of the Year. Even if you found it today, it can be challenging to understand how this practice fits into your everyday life or how you can incorporate it into your personal practice. Unfortunately, for me, there is an amazing community of Seasons of the Witch fans who I get the privilege of having wonderful conversations with every single day. Particularly this year, now that the series is very nearly done and people are realizing that it is a full series, I have just had like the most amazing conversations. And out of these conversations and with my own particular observances in my personal practice, I've come to realize that what it means to be a witch is evolving. What it means to have a spiritual practice is evolving as well, as it should. Um, what it means to be a witch today is not the same thing as what it meant to be a witch 200 years ago, or even 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago. I think about like how witchcraft was when I first started in my practice versus what it is today, and it's just completely different. And that's fair, as time progresses and as things march on and the world and society changes, it makes sense that your spiritual practice will probably change with it too. So that's kind of where this today's theme came from, is how to make the Sabbats your own, is observing the fact that your practice may not always be in alignment with what is always traditionally done or what you see people doing on social media. At the end of the day, a spiritual practice should be authentic to you. It should resonate with you, and it should be something that feels good, that promotes your goals, and that helps you have personal growth. Now, there's a number of reasons why you'd want to personalize and adapt a practice as it relates to the Wheel of the Year, and I'm going to share a few just before we dive into the thick of things. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are the things that I see coming up the most, some of the challenges that come up with adapting the Wheel of the Year for yourself. Um, Chief among them is I always get people who reach out to me and they say, you know what, Lorraine, I don't live in a climate where it snows. I don't live in a climate where the leaves change. Weather is like something that comes up a lot. And I always respond to these messages the same way. Neither do I. I live in Los Angeles, which is a desert. I know it's a big city and we live near a beach, but ultimately it's very dry here. It's very warm. The only way you're going to get anything remotely close to snow is if you want to drive like 3 hours up the side of a very, very big mountain called Big Bear. And sometimes it's even more than that. There's a whole thing about like change, and sometimes it takes 8 hours to get there because everyone is driving up this mountain. But I digress. The point is, that's about the closest thing that you're going to get to snow in Los Angeles. So I don't have access to the Northern European climate that's often associated with the wheel of the year. But that doesn't mean that I can't work with the Sabbats. I just need to alter my idea of what it means to work with them and alter my perspective. And I hope that I'm going to help you do the same thing. Now, another reason that you might want to adapt or adopt a wheel of adapt your practice is because the wheel of the year is based on very old things like farming. Most of us don't farm. I love my garden. I really do, but it's a lot of work. It is understandable that in a society where the closest thing to gardening you've probably gotten to in a very long time is buying frozen broccoli out of the grocery store, that you really don't want to be bothered with gardening. It takes a lot of time, often money, resources, know-how, things that, we don't need to do those things to survive nowadays. I'll give you an example with my own personal garden. I had like this big sprawling garden, and my water hose got a bunch of little holes in it for some reason, and then the connection corroded. And so I couldn't water my garden. And basically all of that time and money had went to waste when, that's a lot of hassle when you can just go to the grocery store. So I totally get why some things like that you often see going around are not things you want to be bothered with. Uh, but unfortunately, the wheel of the year is primarily based on agriculture. And I think a lot of the Sabbath practices that you see around, especially in social media, can sometimes feel antiquated or even a bit out of touch, particularly in a post-COVID world. Um, it was really romantic when we were all staying at home and had nothing better to do, to have your little garden or to churn your own butter or to knit your own sweater, when we were all at home for weeks or even sometimes months on end. But now the world has gone back to the way things have been, and people want to have fun and they want to spend time with their friends and family and they want to do things. They want to have experiences. I am 100% a homebody, but I also love to travel and I love to do new things. And as much as I wish I were the type to move out to the country and have a quaint little cottage, the fact of the matter is that's not really me. I like having access to modern conveniences of the city. I like being able to go to concerts, try new restaurants, all of those wonderful things. So sometimes I think those romantic notions of a quiet, quaint home can feel pretty unrealistic for a lot of people. Not all people, obviously. There are some people who really love that lifestyle, but I think there's a lot of people where that just doesn't land, and it doesn't always feel like you have time to do a lot of those romantic notions. Not to mention, it can be really intimidating when you see content creators doing these elaborate rituals. But that's their job. That's my job. A lot of us content creators, we do this full time. So yeah, we have time to do all of these things when this is our job to do so. But I can understand how it would be intimidating for someone if you do work 8 hours a day and then you have to go to the grocery store and pick up the kids and do the laundry, and then trying to fit in a long drawn out ritual in your day may not be practical. And then there's one more thing that I really want to dive into before we fully dive into my tips for making the Sabbats your own, is that old ways change. I always like to imagine a young farmer who's like invented a new way to harvest wheat, and he goes to the elders and he's like, I've got this new invention, I've got this new tool, whatever it is, and the elders in his community are thinking, this is not the way we've always done things. You are going against the old traditions. And the young farmer is like, yeah, that's true, but like your back hurts and people are getting injured and we waste a lot of wheat harvesting all these things or something like that. And this farmer's invention has fixed all of those problems. I imagine conversations like that have been happening since probably the dawn of human language. some people wanting to stay stuck in the old ways, whereas there are people who want to move things forward and want to improve things and improve the quality of life. So just because you've always done something a certain way, or just because it's traditional to practice a Sabbath a certain way, does not mean that you have to do that as well. I think you can pay homage to the old ways, but I think you can also establish your own modern traditions, and you can adapt and do things that are going to be really practical for you. So, how do you actually go about making the Sabbats your own? Well, first, I think it really starts with your intention and just knowing, like, why are you even working with the wheel of the year? Why do you feel in alignment with it? What is it that you're hoping to gain? You know, are you doing it because you see everyone else doing it and you feel an expectation that you have to work in tune with the seasons? Um, and I think this is true for any practice, really. Like, you don't have to work with the Sabbats and the moons and the zodiac signs and all of that just because you see everyone else doing it. But if you do choose to work with it, it should reflect your own personal goals and taste, and it should align with you in some way or another. So, an example of this is perhaps you are someone who wants to be deeply connected to the earth. You really want to be in flow with the season. So maybe you are someone who wants to garden. Maybe you are someone who wants to spend time outdoors. Maybe you just want to observe the seasons and you are a really outdoorsy person and you love seeing how maybe you don't have leaves that change in your particular neighborhood, but you love to see how leaves change in a particular street that you have. There's a kind of a running joke here in Los Angeles that there's only 4 streets in all of LA that actually have leaves that change color. So, you know, maybe for you, your Mabon ritual observance is just driving to a park where you know there's a lot of bright foliage where you can go and sit and observe these things. Or um, maybe you want to eat seasonal foods. Like maybe you want to flow in the season that way, where you specifically look for foods that are technically only available during this time rather than eating out of season. That's okay. Or maybe you're someone who has access to travel and you think, you know, I really do want to observe the seasons, but I know I don't live in a climate where I can do that. Maybe I can set my vacation this year to go someplace where I can sit and be in nature and take those experiences back with me and incorporate those into my rituals moving forward in the years to come. Or maybe you want to use the Sabbats for energy work. Like maybe that's your intention, energy work and spiritual connection. Personally, I think the Sabbats are really potent portals of energy. Like I think they open up the door to certain energies and initiate certain energies. And so maybe you reserve the Sabbats for when you want to set intentions, or maybe you want to do very deep clearing work. Maybe from Mabon to Imbolc, you really want to focus on protection and healing and all of those deep dark winter, fall, winter things. And maybe during spring and summer, you want to focus on uplifting and energy and joy. Or maybe you want to switch, you know, things don't always fit neatly into a calendar. Maybe during the fall and winter season, you want to observe abundance in a different way as it relates to fall. I think that's incredibly important to honor what season you're in, not just what season is on the calendar. And um, so this next one is probably going to be an unpopular opinion, but I'm going to say it anyway. Maybe your way that you practice the Sabbats is just aesthetic reasons, right? Maybe you love the idea of taking beautiful photos and videos and making beautiful food or making beautiful ritual things. I see a lot going on social media about how a spiritual practice isn't just about making things pretty. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I think creativity is a form of self-expression, and self-expression is a spiritual act. Being true to yourself is the most spiritual thing you're ever going to do in life. And if making things pretty is how you express yourself, then that's your intention. Doesn't matter what anyone else says. It's totally okay to say, I make beautiful food to observe the Sabbats, or I make these beautiful ritual baths to observe the Sabbats. If that's how you find resonance in the wheel of the year, then I say go for it. And this is ultimately what I mean by setting your intention. Don't try and force yourself to do something that doesn't align with you. Do something that comes natural, something that feels good, something that fulfills your needs, and ultimately something that helps to propel your goals and interests forward. Um, my second tip is to start simple. I think that you don't have to do anything elaborate, and you can always add things on later, especially if you're feeling uninspired. Like, go back to the basics. Kind of just start with the very minimal things you can. Even something as small like lighting a candle on Mabon or Samhain, saying a small prayer. Maybe you keep a mantra with you throughout the day. Doing a simple journal exercise, just little things like that. I think it's okay to observe the Sabbats, be aware of the Sabbats, and not necessarily feel like you have to do this big, grand, elaborate ritual or spell or even tarot spread. It's totally okay to just have little small things that are personal and endearing and provoking for you that maybe don't fit the big, grand things that you see on the internet. Maybe you only want to pull a few cards, or maybe you don't want to cook a meal. Maybe you don't want to have a grand Maven meal, but you know what? There's a favorite restaurant that you love and they serve pumpkin pie this time of the year, and you're going to treat yourself to a slice in honor of Maven. I think that's totally okay. And I actually think it's quite quaint. To be able to say, okay, this is the one day of the year that I treat myself. I'm in, when we think of concepts for Maven, we think of like self-care, nourishment, like personal needs, digging deep into focusing on what you need to feel comfortable and inspired right now. And maybe getting a piece of pumpkin pie is how you feel comfortable for Maven. I think that's totally okay. You can always share it with other people if you want to. It doesn't have to be witchy in nature. I always say that everything is energy, and magic can be doing the elaborate rituals. It can also just be sitting in your favorite chair, enjoying your favorite drink and watching the day go by. Everything is energy if you put the right observation into it. My next tip is to be honest with yourself and to really think about what you really have time for and what you can be committed to, and then adapt from there. I believe a lot of overwhelm, especially spiritual overwhelm, comes from having too much on your plate. I really don't think that you have to do all of the witchy things. You don't have to work with herbs and crystals and tarot cards and pendulums and do ritual work and all of that stuff. If you can only do a few things at a time, that's totally okay. Remember, you can always add more later. So say, for instance, you had this big plan to do this whole ritual bath, but then, your friend calls and their partner broke up with them. So now you have to go and console them, or your dog got into something, ate something they weren't supposed to, and now you got to go to the hospital, or, things happen. Your kid got sick and now you have to deal with that. Life happens. That's totally okay. Release whatever is taking the most time and stress away from you that is not necessarily important. And a lot of time that is rituals and self-care. You can always adapt your practice though. Instead of doing that really long ritual bath, maybe the only thing you have time for is to pull out the essential oil blend out of that bath and put it in a diffuser. And that's enough after you've had a really long, tired evening. Or you pivot and you turn it into a shower instead. Or maybe you had plans to bake this really beautiful loaf of bread for Lamas and you just don't have time now. So you purchase bread instead and you use that in your ritual instead of spending all day baking the bread. Instead of growing your own food, maybe you just find a farmer's market and you talk to a farmer who can tell you about the process of growing food, but you didn't have to grow it yourself. And you're just content with making your own meals. I think that you have to listen to yourself, listen to your life, your practice, and make adjustments accordingly. Or instead of changing your decor every season, maybe you pick out a few things to change, things like the pillows or the sheets, or even just something as small as the air freshener. Or maybe instead of dismantling your altar and starting over again, you just change the offering. Maybe you have one offering for Mabon and a different offering for Samhain. Don't put so much pressure on yourself to do so many things. Remember that you can always go back and add more layers later. You can always take things away. Maybe it isn't practical this year to go all out for Samhain decor. I cannot tell you how many times, how many years I have said I am going to do like deck out my house for Samhain and then for Yule, and it doesn't happen. And the closest thing I can do is put out one pumpkin or a string of Christmas lights, or in some cases, there have been years where the best that I could do is say Blessed Samhain and just observe that the day was here, and that had to be enough. I think it's important for you to do what you have time for rather than what you feel you're expected to do. And then, of course, you can use the Seasons of the Witch oracles for inspiration, right? Sometimes when I get stuck and I don't know what to do for the Sabbats, I'll ask my Seasons of the Witch cards. And I ask my Seasons of the Witch cards everything, but particularly for rituals. You can take out the deck that corresponds to the current Sabbat and ask, what should my Mabon ritual be, for example? And then pull a card and make a list of every idea that comes to mind. I think listing things out, just kind of getting a bunch of ideas out of your head and brainstorming is a great way to like open up your mind. I did this earlier today, as a matter of fact. I was looking at making some Maven ritual content and kind of just plotting my own ritual practice, and I had no idea what I was going to do. So I pulled a card from the Maven deck and I pulled Corn Maze. Now, I could take this literally, and this year, maybe I will visit an actual corn maze. Maybe I will find some place where I can go with my witchy friends and we can make a whole day out of it. Or I might incorporate corn into my rituals. And in fact, there is a corn pudding recipe that my mom makes, and I have not been able to make this recipe at all. I bake a lot, but I just cannot make puddings for whatever reason. So maybe this year, I might try and just let that practice of working on making this pudding and perfecting it be my ritual for the year. It's not witchy in nature in any way, shape, or form, but it is a form of self-expression. And like I was saying earlier, sometimes just expressing yourself is a spiritual act. However, this card also means honoring your personal beliefs and values. And I think that really spoke to the theme of this workshop. So I decided that my ritual was going to be for Mabon to sit down and really figure out, what is my spiritual practice? Like, really be honest with myself. What do I really want moving forward? What is actually important to me? Like, what do I believe in? What am I hoping to gain out of my spirituality? How have I grown? Excuse me. And the best thing about pulling a card, I think, for your rituals is that it's based entirely on you and your energy. It's not like you just like pluck something off of the internet and are hoping that it resonates with you. It's really your soul drawing the card that you needed most at that time and making a decision for your rituals based off of that. And I think that's probably the easiest way to personalize your rituals, whether you do it with the Seasons of the Witch decks or not. You can do it with any oracle or tarot deck, but just pulling a card and saying, what do I need to accomplish this Sabbath? What do I need to do? And then, like I said, list out everything and see what comes to mind, see what comes up for you, and see how maybe what card you pulled is in alignment with the Sabbath. If you pulled a specific card that in some way means balance or grounding for Mabon, like maybe sit with that and see what this card is really trying to tell you, and then go from there. So I probably like plowed through this a little bit. I always get nervous during these things, just full disclosure. But I am going to take questions in just a little bit, in just a moment. But before I do that, I just really want to drive home that there's no right or wrong way to be a witch. Okay. There's no right or wrong way to be spiritual. There's no right or wrong way to honor the seasons. You have to listen to your mind. You have to listen to your body. You have to listen to your soul and choose practices and exercises that feel good for you. If you're feeling overwhelmed or if you're feeling frustrated, chances are you're probably doing the wrong practice and need to consider something else. Yes, a spiritual practice should be challenging in some ways. Like, of course, you want to heal or you want to grow or you want to do all of those things. And that's not always going to be easy, but you should feel some sort of resonance. You should feel some sort of alignment. Like, things shouldn't feel like it's a chore to do. It shouldn't feel like it is like depleting your soul to try and force this into your day. It should really feel good. I can't say this enough. This is your practice, no one else. So if you're doing something because everyone else is doing it and it doesn't feel good, give yourself permission to let that go and try something else. So anyway, I really hope you guys enjoyed this or got something meaningful out of it. It is an ongoing process, an ongoing discovery of me learning what it means to evolve and to grow as a witch and as a spiritual person. So yeah, I'm gonna stop talking now and you guys just ask me whatever questions you want to ask and let's have a nice, wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. Personally, I did get a lot out of it. So, very informative. And again, I just love how it's bringing these concepts of spirituality and witchcraft and all of that into modernity, into our everyday life. It doesn't have to be this separate thing that's on the side, and we have to do all these super special things to be spiritual, that we can be spiritual in our everyday. I think that's really
Yeah.
important.
For sure, for sure, for sure. I actually think it's more spiritual to do things in the everyday than it is to do it on these like, these big, grand, dramatic things. I think, like I was saying earlier, spirituality is just about being yourself and honoring your authenticity. And that happens every day, right? It doesn't just happen on one calendar day of the year or just a few. So, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So a couple questions from the crowd.
Mhm.
How do you envision people using your deck in their personal practices?
Okay, so I definitely get this question a lot. I think obviously the easiest way to use these decks is to use them as a daily draw, right? That's the way that I use them the most. Because they flow through the seasons. I think it's an easy way for me to switch them out and not get bored. And to have different energies that I can work with throughout the year. But also, I really love to use them for visualization techniques and for meditation techniques. I love to pull out cards and kind of just place them around my house. Like sometimes, actually, I was just writing something about this earlier, where I pull out maybe like 3 or 4 cards for the season and place them around my house. And just when I see them, here and there, I kind of stop and I contemplate, what does this card mean? Like, what is this card trying to tell me? Just the fact that I noticed it today versus yesterday to me is meaningful. Like we notice the things that we need to notice at the time. So I think definitely using them for visualization purposes, especially because they're so pretty, they're so beautiful, right? It's very easy to sit and visualize and meditate on something that's very gorgeous anyway. I think it's really, really helpful. And with daily draws, I think it's important to do daily draws and to record them. Please, please, please record your tarot readings and messages because you do want to go back and look at them and see if there's a pattern in a bigger picture that you can pull out. And even that can become like a reflective process.
Absolutely. Well, good thing that we have journals that go along with a lot of the decks, so
That's true.
you can have that recording with right along with the cards that you're pulling as well. Another question: how has creating oracle decks impacted your personal and spiritual growth?
Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm just going to pause that, go back to the last question and say with the journals, if you pull a card many, many, many times, the cards go to the corresponding entry in the journal. Like that is for you. You need to make sure that you go and do that journal prompt. Okay, going back to this next question. How has it impacted my practice? Man, I cannot it writing oracle cards has been, I think, the biggest influence in my spiritual practice. Mostly what it's taught me is how to get out of spirit's way because this is what happens. I go and I think I'm going to write an oracle deck and I think it's going to be one thing. And spirit is like, yeah, that's fine. We'll give her some space to think she's going to do what she wants to do. And then I get into the thick of things and spirit is like, okay, this is what we really want you to do. And I'm like, I don't care. I'm going to do what I want to do. And then they're like, now we have to like drop this big lesson on your lap and make it really difficult for you. And I have to work through all the lessons and I have to bring all of that into my writing. And ultimately, what I thought I knew to be true is not true at all. And I had to go back and really listen to my spirit and really listen to the lessons that are around me. And it really forces me to be observant. and to bring those observations into my spiritual practice, which is ultimately what I hope you would do with tarot cards, right? Is that they spark some sort of awareness in you. So it has forced me to realize that I'm not usually in control of things, I'm not in control of the lessons that I learn and when I learn them. And I have had to learn to go with the flow of things to realize that life becomes a lot easier when you go with the flow versus against it. Um, and then I always find that I think that I have gotten further along in my practice in some way, or that I'm an expert. I know all the things, right? And then I start an oracle deck and I realize I know nothing at all. And I have to really like reorganize myself and I have to like dive deeper. I think there's always an opportunity to dive deeper. And every time I start a new oracle deck, that becomes very apparent that I can always go a layer deeper. So it really does bring to mind that, spiritual practice is ongoing. There is no like end goal. There's never going to be a day where I don't have any spiritual growth. And oracle decks have a real good way of reminding me of that.
Isn't that why they call it practice?
Well, this is exactly why, right? Because it is an ongoing practice. And, as you evolve, naturally, your practice is going to evolve too. And I really have come to see that with the Oracle decks. When I look at the first Oracle deck I've written versus the one that I'm writing now, it is like all of them are beautiful, but I can definitely see how I'm in a different place. And I think just the process of writing Oracle decks really helped me to see that. I think sometimes it's hard to know day to day like what you're learning as a spiritual practice, but with Oracle decks, I have no choice.
Yeah, and it reminds me of lessons in humility. That relinquishing control to whatever you believe that higher power is through that spirituality, that we aren't controlling everything and need to control everything, that we can be humble and let life and spirit guide us as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I have a question from a Gemma Davies. She says, I have been using the Seasons deck since Australian Samhain in April, and they have totally shifted my experience of the Sabbats. I would be lost without a star deck come September. Thank you so much for creating them. She asks, can you speak to how you collaborated with your illustrators?
Yes. Okay. So I love collaborating with illustrators. It's such a wonderful process because I have an idea in mind. So basically what happens is I conceptualize the deck. I have an idea in mind of what I want each card to look like, and I give like a tiny little brief. Um, but the beautiful thing about working with someone else is that they have ideas too, right? Like they have their own level of creativity, particularly with illustrators, because being an illustrator is a creative job. So usually I'll come up with something and I think, oh, this is great. And then they'll come back and they'll give me like, they'll just blow me away with some detail that I hadn't even considered. So it really is a collaborative work where I prefer that we work together as much as possible. I spend a lot of time talking to the illustrators one-on-one so that we're on the same page or we can bounce ideas off of one another. I really try and leave a lot of space in the briefs, even when I have like my ideas, I try and leave a lot of open-ended parts so that they can put their creativity in there too. And it can really be a collaborative effort versus me just saying it has to be this way.
Mhm.
Because when you do that, you close your mind off, right? And like, I don't know what I don't know. And I only have my perspective. Somebody else has another perspective that could completely shatter my perspective. Kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, right? Like sometimes you just got to get out of your own way. Sometimes you got to realize that your way is not the only way to do things, and you have to leave the door open for somebody else to introduce something in there. And then usually we talk about it, and if something doesn't work, it doesn't work. But like we like to play around and we like to try things. And my feeling is always try it. Let's try it and see what happens.
Yeah. Um, Now, how were you introduced to the Wheel of the Year originally?
Okay, so the first time I ever got introduced to the Wheel of the Year was in this book. I thought it was an apothecary book. It was, but it wasn't. It was more like a witchcraft book, right? And it was back before I had like done anything like this. And I remember reading this book. It was a bath book, by the way. I remember reading this book and I had no idea what they were talking about. I just knew that they were talking about like the changing of the seasons. And even before I knew I was like into witchcraft or whatever, I had always really resonated with the idea of the seasons. I've always been like a green witch. It's just what it is. Like we've been a green household since I was like 12. Um, so when I saw it in the book, I thought, oh, this is cool. Didn't really know much about it, but it felt like it resonated. And then I ended up working, I manifested this job. I love to tell the story because I manifested this job that had my personal background in operations and logistics, combined with my hobby, which was herbalism and aromatherapy. And I manifested this job at this crystal, like big, gigantic crystal emporium. And part of my responsibility there was writing content. And the woman, like, she said she was a witch. She said it in her interview. I was like, oh, that's a lot to digest, but sure. And I was just like, I'm taking the job. It sounds cool to me. And one of the responsibilities she gave me was writing content. And she's like, I'm going to introduce you to this concept called the Wheel of the Year. And when she started talking about it, I realized it was the same thing in the book. And I went, oh, holy shit. Like, I didn't even know this was a thing. Actually, and to add that on, when I was a kid, I had a very vivid dream about Samhain. It was called Samhain in the dream, had no idea what that meant, but I never forgot the dream. And it always gives me chills because this word had entered my mind in the dream world, which I did not have any concept of, but obviously, foretelling my future.
Yeah.
um, and so anyway, she started teaching me this whole process, and I just remember that it resonated so deeply, like even more than 4 seasons, just this idea that I could follow the progression of the earth and that it could teach me all of these things and it can serve as an archetype. And I just dove in. It was probably, if not the very first spiritual concept that really landed for me, it was like one of the first three. And I just, you kind of find those things where things just like land on your spirit and you just go forth with it. Interestingly enough, I found the Wheel of the Year and tarot and oracle cards right at the same time. So funny that those two converged at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Now, everybody has a favorite, or if you're a Season of the Witch Oracle fan, you probably have a favorite season. Um, Mine is Imbolc. Is it okay to use that deck year round?
Yes. So you can use these decks whenever you want. It doesn't matter if you're using Imbolc on Letha or Samhain, doesn't matter. Um, Kind of like what I was saying earlier with the Sabbats, try and think of the weather as secondary, the calendar as secondary, and instead look at the days as archetypes, like evolutionary energies that you can tap into. And things like that don't really fit neatly on a calendar, right? Like, come fall, everyone's going to start talking about the shadow work practice and all of that good stuff, right? And that's fine. But, you might have a dark night of the soul in the middle of June or in the middle of summer. And that doesn't, Spirit's not going to wait for the calendar to say September 21st or for Maven for you to go and deal with this, so if it hits you in the middle of summertime, then grab your Samhain or Maven deck and use it for that purpose. It really does not matter what day of the year you use them. If you want to change out your Seasons of the Witch decks every single day, 365 days a year, where you cycle through a new one every 8 days, that's totally fine too. Likewise, with the shadow work example, you may be in a particularly abundant season come wintertime. Like maybe you got a raise, maybe your business just took off. I don't know, whatever happened, and you really want to honor abundance and growth. Then maybe you grab your Letha deck and you use that as your way to, help you to continue building this wealth mindset. That's totally fine too. I think that the only wrong day to use an Oracle deck is when you don't want to use it. That's it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Now, this might be a controversial question. I don't know if controversy is the right word, but or maybe a hard question, but do you have a favorite season? And if so, why?
I do have a favorite season. Imbolc is my favorite season. Uh, I think So there's my favorite season, and then there's my favorite deck. So those two answers are not the same. I just want to point that out.
Okay.
Um, Invoke is my favorite season because I love the rain in it. So my name's Lorraine. Rain is my nickname. People call me that all the time. I've always loved the rain. We don't get a lot of rain here in Los Angeles. The time of the year that we do tend to get rain is in January and February, which is around Invoke.
Mhm.
So I love, like, to me, that is the most season-like thing we have in Los Angeles. Like, we have two seasons. We have hot and then we have rain. Like, that's it. So that time of year around in bulk already feels like it's the most natural time for me to honor the changing of the seasons. Um, but also I just really love the cold. And I think Imbolc is the most solitary of all the Sabbats too. And I've never really been like a coven type of girl. I've always been a solo practitioner. So the themes of like self energy really resonate with me, and those are Imbolc specific things. So that's always felt like the season that lands the most for me.
Mhm.
Oracle deck though, I always say my favorite Oracle deck is whatever season we're in. So right now it's Maven because I'm getting ready to switch out my Maven deck. So that's my favorite now. And then it'll be Samhain and Yule and so on and
Yeah.
so forth.
But
There
is
was somebody else who asked a question about the Southern Hemisphere, if I can answer that one
yeah,
real quick.
please.
Okay, so Natalia said here in the Southern Hemisphere, sometimes I see people practicing like they are in the Northern Hemisphere. What is your opinion of that? I think that that is kind of going back to what I was saying before, that like, just put the weather aside, like put aside the whole idea that the weather is how you observe the Sabbats. I don't think it matters. That you practice it like you're in the southern or northern hemisphere. I think what's more important is that you're getting the evolutionary growth out of it, that you are using the sabbats as a way to, heal or grow or evolve or shed or protect or whatever your intention is. So if you want to flow in alignment with the northern hemisphere, I think that's fine. At the end of the day, as beautiful as the Wheel of the Year is, it's primarily based on a Northern European climate. So that's not going to fit for most people on the planet, right? I mean, it'll fit for some, but I think for most people, you're just not going to have that same alignment with the weather. So why fight it? We're not going to fight it. We're just going to use it for the evolutionary period that it is. Kind of like what I was saying before. I'm not a farmer. You're not a farmer. We're not doing agricultural things. And that's really what this is for anyway. Things can evolve and grow as our society has
Mm.
evolved and grown. And, we are an interconnected world now. We're having a summit where Olatunji is in Australia, clear on the other side of the world, and I'm in Los Angeles. So I think we're all connected. We should lean into that.
Um, absolutely. Now, you mentioned switching over decks for yourself, just in your own personal practices. Do you do it based on the Wheel of the Year, or can there even be other things that trigger you to say, "Oh, I'm going to switch over my deck now"?
Kind of both. So I do switch out my decks based on the Wheel of the Year. Usually what will happen is, like, for Maven, I'm gonna switch out to the Maven deck September 1st, and then I'll use that through October. Like September 30th. I can't September has 30 or 31 days. Whatever the last day of September is, I'm gonna put it away and then pull out Samhain and use it for October. But sometimes there are instances where I am really looking for the type of energy that Yule has. Like, I'm really looking for cheery, celebratory energy. So I might pull that out for a specific reason. Um, like Letha, for example, I pull out Letha a lot because it is the most like related to abundance and growth. And I think that's such a big part of my everyday practice, is focusing on wealth mindset and abundance mindset. So I use Letha all the time. I've had my copies for a while, so I've been using Letha all year long from like January up until now, and I probably will continue to do so. So I think there's no right or wrong way to use them. I think it's beautiful to flow in with the seasons because obviously they're based off of the seasons, and it's nice to have that alignment. But I also think it's really nice to just honor your personal season. Like, what season are you in your own spirit, and saying, okay, I'm in a summer season, so I'm gonna grab Lamass or Letha, or I'm in a spring season, so I'm gonna grab Astra or Beltane, even if it's the middle of fall. And also too, when we look at the hemispheres, for example, right? Like it's summer right now in Los Angeles, it's winter in Australia. You know, at some point on the planet, the opposite season is happening. So you can also honor that and you know, honor that the fact that the Earth doesn't just have one season at a time, it has two seasons at a time. So you can also connect with that as well.
Yep, that's great. Um, I have a question from another question from Gemma.
Mhm.
Do you celebrate the Sabbat days based on the traditional dates or the actual celestial dates?
I do it based on the traditional dates. I just think it's easier. Of course, you can do the celestial dates, but you have to like go and look it up or calculate them. And to be honest, I am a lazy practitioner. Like I want things to be as easy as possible. So I tend to just go on like the traditional September 21st, March 21st, like that sort of
Mm.
thing. Um, Also because I know I said keep it simple earlier, but I do observe the traditional season, spring, summer, fall, that whole thing, the Sabbats and the zodiac signs, and often the moons. And when you start trying to calculate things very specifically, I think it gets complicated. So I'm trying to make it as easy as possible and just find the way that these things converge. And just I kind of just pick one day where they all can be observed at one time, or you know, they can all initiate one energy at one time. I find that easier and more practical.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Um, there's a question. I feel a little disconnected from some of the sabbats. What can I do to feel more inspired or connected to my least favorite seasons?
Well, I think mostly, again, like I think part of the reason why a lot of people don't feel connected to the Sabbats is probably just because a lot of the practices are antiquated or impractical. I think
Mhm.
you kind of have to look at what it is that you don't like about it or why it doesn't resonate and ask yourself, okay, how can I adapt this to my personal life? So, like, for example, a lot of people tell me that they don't like Imbolc. They don't really understand Imbolc. They don't know like what it does for them specifically. Um, and I think that's because a lot of people, we don't have that concept of what it's like to be in the thick of winter and feeling like we're just happy to be alive, right? Because that's what really Invoke is about. It's like a celebration that winter is almost over and like we can, or even a great example of this is that lambs typically have, you know, their little lamb babies. Sheep have lambs, whatever it is, have their lamb babies around Imbolc. So for a lot of times, this is the first time that people back then would have access to milk in many, many months. We don't have those challenges, right? Like, well, obviously, we can go to the grocery store and grab milk. We can go and don't we can grab cheese and all those things. We don't have to worry about meat spoiling and all of that stuff. So it feels like it doesn't resonate for that reason. But we can shift our perspective to other things. Like we can be, instead of being grateful that winter is over, we can be grateful that, you know, we don't have to live like that anymore. Instead of like looking at it from the sense that we're waiting for summer to come, or we're celebrating the return of the light, we can just celebrate the return of joy in our own spirit or the ability to get outside with people that we love. You have to modernize Sabbats, I think. I really just can't say this enough that I do think a lot of the Sabbath traditions are antiquated and a bit out of touch. So you have to look at each Sabbath and see how it fits with your life specifically, and how you can adapt it to energies that are more resonant with you. Um, and then,
Yep.
you know, like Lamaze is another example, one of those ones that kind of don't resonate with a lot of people because, I mean, a harvest festival, we don't like who's harvesting wheat. Most people aren't. It's not something that a lot of people feel resonant with. But you know what? A lot of people like beer and a lot of people like bread. So you can use whatever you need to as a connection to the Sabbath and do it in a way that really fits your perspective. If you want to have a beer festival with your friends to honor Lamaze, I think that's okay too. And it's really fun.
Sure is. Um, how do you clear your mind clutter and know what direction feels right? You know, so often we've got all these different, whether it's the everyday life, the work life, the family life, all these different thoughts flying through our head. And sometimes that can just be overwhelming and it can be hard to find direction and connection in the midst of all that. Do you have any tips, tricks, ideas on clearing that away?
Yeah, I think, and it takes time and practice to do this, but I think you always have to ask yourself, do I really want to do this? Is this really something that I enjoy doing? Is this something that I want to do? I feel like I do that a lot because I have a lot of moving parts in my life. And sometimes I find that I say yes to things or I commit to things that I don't really care about. It's one thing to commit to somebody who, is a close loved one and you're doing a solid for them or whatever. But I think it's something else to just commit to things blindly and not really knowing why you're doing it. So much of the time, a lot of all that mental clutter and chatter is just everybody else's mental clutter and chatter that you've picked up and you've internalized for yourself. So one, I think you need to really ask how much of it is originating from you. And when it is originating from you, how much of it you really want and how much you need to let go of. And then from a spiritual perspective, a practice that I started doing years ago, which I swear makes the biggest difference, is just at the end of the day, or even if you can only do it once a week, like at night before you go to bed, close your eyes and just imagine sending all of the energy somewhere else. Like just say whatever energy does not belong to me, did not originate to me from me, that I don't need to hold, just take it away from me. You can say send it back to its point of origin. You can say send it down to the earth. You can say send it out into the ether. It doesn't matter, just as long as you're sending it back. And then after that, recall your energy back and saying, I'm recalling my energy that I gave away to everyone else. Like any intentionally or unintentionally, I always say across space and time between all dimensions, just sending energy back and recalling it. And I think being intentional about that, you realize how much energy you do give away during the day, how much energy you pick up from people during the day. And then you can kind of start to put space and distance between yourself and all of that mental clutter. And if you start doing that practice over a period of time, you'll start to realize, you know what, I'm having this thought right now, and I don't really think this is coming from me. I think this is something that, somebody said to me at the grocery store and I've been carrying it, but I don't really think that it's true for me. And have those conversations with yourself. Don't be afraid to talk to yourself. It really helps to just kind of brainstorm with yourself and be honest and say, I'm going to really check in and ask myself what it is I'm really feeling. To be fair, I should say that I have been going to a therapist for a very, very long time. And part of what I love about the practice that I do, which is called internal family systems, is that it is basically shadow work in therapy form. And so part of that practice is turning inward and asking, we call them parts in therapy. But it will be something like emotions, like anger or something, or mental fog, turning in and saying, okay, I have this mental fog. Mental fog, tell me what it is that you want right now. Like, what are you trying to get me to understand? What are you trying to tell me that I need to drop? And really having those internal dialogues. So I will be honest about that I do use that a lot in my personal practice, and it really helps. If you ever get a chance to check out internal family systems, please do, because from a spiritual perspective, I think that therapy is like basically made for us.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it has been fantastic to have this conversation with you, Lorraine, as always. We thank you so much for coming on. There are some more questions, but we are running short on time. For the questions that we didn't get answered, we'll try to send them on and have some conversation so that we can get those out to the people that asked them. But it has been a real pleasure. We thank you so much for continuing the work of bringing spirituality and witchcraft into modernity, and for hanging out today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, and thanks guys for joining me.